What the heck is going on with our power system around this country? I know that South Australia's is broken, and so I wasn't surprised when the lights went out at Adelaide Oval. But 25,000 Queenslanders were plunged into darkness in the last 24 hours as well. I think this is going to be a really long, hot summer, given what Victoria and New South Wales were going through. I mean, last week they were saying, if you got an air conditioner, we might control it. If you've got your hot water system, we might control it. What is going on? Energex and Queensland government say the outages here were due to a mechanical trigger which activates when the system is at risk of imploding due to overuse. What? In other words, the system just can't handle the demand. It's happening all over the country, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia. Really, during summer, we have to turn off our air cons, non-essential appliances, just to nurse-maid this power system through. I'm blaming Chris Bowen. I don't care what anyone else says. It only reinforces why we just shouldn't turn off access to reliable 24/7 electricity from coal or turn a blind eye to nuclear. Otherwise, we're going to be living in, the dark ages. The Federal Energy Opposition spokesperson is Ted O'Brien, is the member for Fairfax on the Sunshine Coast. You've been talking about this for some time, Ted. Great to talk to you. This is a problem. You're not surprised, I imagine?
Unfortunately, Gary, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's Queensland for crying out loud, and it's summer. It gets hot. I mean, seriously, the Albanese government has been warned about this for a long time, and they have refused to listen. And the sad thing is it will only get worse from here because they are forcing the premature closure of baseload power stations. They are suffocating the supply of gas, the very technologies we've relied on to not just keep prices down, but the lights actually on. Then lo and behold, it gets hot and the lights go out. They've been told it would be so, and still today there's crickets, radio silence from the minister on this one.
I mean, the grid is part of the problem, as I understand it. And I know a decade or more ago, we were being told as people were putting rooftop solar on that only 1 in 4 homes could have it because you couldn't feed too much of the solar into the grid in our local suburbs. So that's the local suburban grid. But the grid itself is going to need a big refurb if we're going to go more renewable.
And I think this is one of the parts of the cost that few people talk about, Gary. You're dead right. I mean, the coalition believes in a balanced energy mix. And yes, that does include renewables, but we shouldn't be closing the coal plants early. And when they do finally retire from the system, we should be looking at nuclear energy, and we need more gas. But if you take Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese's approach of a renewables-only grid, then suddenly you are going to have kilometres, tens of thousands of extra kilometres of transmission lines. And that in itself opens up vulnerability to the grid and an enormous amount of cost. But let's not forget, renewables work about 1/3 of the time. So if you want to compare it to a coal plant, if you want to compare it to a nuclear plant, let's say, you need 3 times more renewables than you otherwise would need. And they're distributed energy sources. In other words, you spread them out. So a solar plant, you're going to use about 75 times the amount of land than you would for a nuclear plant. It's even worse with wind, up to 360 times the amount of land. So when you have all of these built, 3 times the capacity you'd otherwise need and spread around the place, of course you have the most enormous number of transmission lines, and that leads to an increase in cost. So our problem is not with a technology called renewables. Our problem is with an ideological government that says one technology can do the whole job. It can't. The lights are going out, prices are soaring, even emissions are going up, Gary. The whole thing's a disaster.
Yeah, and look, and I see these TV ads that we're paying for as taxpayers about a future made in Australia. I don't know how we can have a future made in Australia when you can't even keep the aircon on and the lights go out at the cricket. But fair dinkum, I find that whole thing turns my stomach. Acres and acres and acres, hundreds of these wind turbines covering up what normally would have been usable agricultural land or natural national parks and so forth. I just find this whole thing just hell-bent on stupidity. It's just awful.
And look, it's not just threatening some prime agricultural land. It's cutting the tops of mountaintops. It's going through forests. some of the offshore wind zones. I was at Port Stephens last week, directly off the coastal strip, threatening not just people's livelihoods, but those local communities haven't had any of their questions answered with respect to impact on ocean wildlife and whatnot. And this is the problem. We're talking about the most complicated computer system in the Southern Hemisphere when it comes to our electricity grid. It's complicated stuff, which means you have to be led by the engineering and the economics. You should not be led by arbitrarily set targets by Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese. And that's what's happening today. And it's no wonder, unfortunately, the lights are going off, and it's everyday Australians who are copping the brunt of it.
Yeah, the cost we're paying for. Now, last week, David Janetsky, who's Queensland's energy minister, his job is to keep the power prices down. I wish him well. But last week I was pretty excited when he said that he is technologically agnostic. I think the last person I heard say that was you. Have you had any discussions about what he means by that, including, say, nuclear? Come on, tell us, Ted. I want to know.
Look, David and I haven't spoken over the last week or so, but I think he's going to do a terrific job, is the truth of it, Gary. I think at long last, Queensland has the adults in the room, and, David has been handballed an energy disaster from Stephen Miles and the Labor Party. It's sort of your worst nightmare as an energy minister, right? You walk in and you take the baton from the Labor Party, and sure enough, within weeks, the lights are going out. And so he's certainly got his work cut out for him. I think they've made a lot of good decisions thus far. They haven't been shy in saying that we need to continue using our baseload power. I think that's a hell of a good start. And there'll be plenty of time as we continue to speak about the importance of replacing coal as it exits the system with nuclear energy. And I look forward to having those chats with David Janetsky over time.
Now, I can say this, Ted. I used to be a minister in the Department of Science, so let me just say to you, I am so disappointed the CSIRO now is so politicised. They've come out with these revised nuclear costings today, and they've found that nuclear is more expensive than renewables. Obviously, they're trying to keep their funding going under the current government. This does not make sense to me when they're looking at things in a selective way. That's my version of their numbers. What's your take?
Well, certainly their conclusions run contrary to what we are seeing right around the world, Gary. And I have studied this at length. The Labor Party and even this Gen Cost report, they're completely isolated. And it's all very interesting stuff, but it's not the main game because it doesn't model the coalition's policy, which includes nuclear. It doesn't even model the cost of the power system for the household or businesses. So, it's an interesting piece and there'll be lots of debate about it. But I tell you what has been costed, Labor's plan to get to a net zero electricity grid. And it's going to cost 5 times more than what Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese have been telling the Australian people. They've been telling people it's going to cost around about $121 billion. It's going to cost over $640 billion. And that's not for the whole thing, by the way. That's just, transmission, storage and generation. So they've been caught out. And since that's been revealed only a few weeks ago, they haven't even rebutted it because they know it's the truth. They've been caught being dishonest about this. They promised Australians a $275 reduction in household power bills. Now Australians are paying nearly $1,000 more than what Labor promised, and now they've been busted because they've been talking about the cost of their plan to move forward, and in fact it's 5 times more. No wonder the prices are going up and Australians are feeling poorer.
Yeah, my understanding is about $1.5 trillion worth of new transmission lines, which is kind of at the heart of all of these problems that we've been talking about today. It's a lot of money and it's got to set Australia up for the future. Again, I don't know how we can have a future made in Australia, AI, all the data, all the things that technology is driving to us, if we don't have cheap, reliable 24/7 electricity. It just makes no sense to me, Ted, where we're at right now.
And it won't be a future made in Australia. Gary, you're right. Ultimately, businesses are closing their doors. We've seen that since Labor came to power federally. Nearly 25,000 businesses gone, insolvent. And where are the big manufacturing businesses going when they close their doors? Typically India and predominantly China. where do we import most of our energy infrastructure that Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese wants to double down on? China. So, yes, they have a future made in policy, but in truth, it's far more a future made in China than it will be a future made in Australia.
Yeah, a future made with our coal as well. Ted O'Brien, good to talk to you. Have a Merry Christmas.
Likewise, Gary.